I'm more than happy to welcome you to tonight's rally, Global Crisis, What's the Socialist Way Out? And this rally is part of this year's summer school held by the Committee for Workers International, which is the first international school after the refundation of the CWI in July 2019, which took place actually not very far from here. And back then, we discussed the centrality of a clear orientation towards the working class in our program and the general need for a fully developed socialist program. This discussion in 2019 was a preparation for the events that were soon to be unfolding with the mass upheavals in Chile and other countries on the South American continent and across the globe. In 2020, we saw how a global pandemic swept across the globe, which still hasn't ended yet, and which the ruling class neither was able nor willing to take any effective measures against to save the lives and the living standards of the working masses and the poor. Earlier this year, we witnessed the devastating attack of the Russian regime on Ukraine and the whole new historic situation unfolding before our eyes. We are entering an era of intensified struggles of not only the imperialist powers, bringing unprecedented misery to the masses, but also the masses fighting back against corrupt regimes, as we have recently seen in Sri Lanka, with the Rajapaksa presidency being toppled. No more than ever, a revolutionary socialist program is needed to show a way forward out of the misery that the capitalist system brings us. We are not only commentators or standers by in that situation, but we actively organize in struggles. We take part in the fight back as we organize ourselves in revolutionary organizations to build the force that brings about the socialist change that is so urgently needed. Now I'm very proud to introduce our speakers to you from different countries that will report on the struggles taking place, which they are part of, and a socialist way forward out of the capitalist crisis. First speaker will be Claire from the US, from the Independent Socialist Group. Second speaker will be Lucie from France, from Gauche Révolutionnaire. Then we are going to have a short video clip from Sri Lanka. After that, Senan from the International Secretariat and Tamil Solidarity will speak. After that, Rob from England and Wales, from the Socialist Party. Pamela from Socialismo Revolucionario in Chile. Then Peter from the Socialist Party, England and Wales. And then we're going to have a financial appeal, which is being introduced by Helen from the Socialist Party. Then a short video of our Nigerian comrade, you saw him already, Soweto. The speaker after that will be Weitzman from the Marxist Workers' Party in South Africa. And the last speaker will be Tony from the International Secretariat, closing the meeting. My name is René. I'm a member of the German section, the socialist organization Solidarity, and I'm very happy to hand it over to Claire.
Thank you everyone who made it out tonight, and thank you René for the introduction. As was said, my name is Claire Baylor, and I'm a member of the Independent Socialist Group in the United States, which stands in political solidarity with the Committee for Workers International and all our sister sections around the world. I want to start tonight by saying solidarity with all the workers fighting for union rights at Starbucks, Amazon, Chipotle, Apple, Trader Joe's, Delta Airlines, and other workplaces that have battled for decades to keep workers from organizing and winning better pay, benefits, staffing, schedules, workplace safety, and job protections. Working class people in the US and around the world are being crushed by inflation. Capitalists and their politicians in the US are still trying to blame this unprecedented inflation on the $2,000 stimulus checks workers got during the pandemic over 2 years ago. They're trying to say that it is the small increases in wages that some people got during the Great Resignation, driving housing, food, and fuel costs sky high. But life was unaffordable for working people before the pandemic, and it's only worse now. The US labor movement is showing signs of life because we cannot afford to be squeezed any longer. Workplaces that have brutally resisted unionization for decades are seeing crucial breakthroughs. And many workers, especially young workers, are inspired by and discussing the successful unionizations at Starbucks and Amazon in particular. But winning union recognition is just the first step in the ongoing struggle. And as socialists, we have to help point workers in struggle towards the next steps, as we've seen them play out time and time again. The struggle for a first contract, the need for rank and file workers to reclaim conservative, bureaucratized unions and turn them back into fighting organizations of the working class. The need for a struggle by union members to break their unions from the grip of the Democratic Party and to link up with mass movements like Black Lives Matter and the women's movement in order to build a new workers' party. There is a clear hunger for socialism that has only sharpened under the recent blows, or the blows of recent attacks. Recent Supreme Court decisions have shown a new generation of workers exactly how fragile reforms are under capitalism. The repeal of Roe v. Wade, of abortion rights, sent shockwaves across the world, including sparking solidarity protests here in the UK, where our comrades intervened brilliantly. Workers have been discussing energetically, furiously, about how it is possible for 6 unelected judges to roll back the right to abortion supported by over 60% of the US population. They are fed up with both corporate parties, the Republicans that initiated these attacks, and the Democrats who have refused to guarantee federal abortion rights despite 50 years of campaign promises. The CWI is holding this rally tonight because US workers are not alone in our struggles, including the struggles for abortion rights. While our movement is facing a temporary defeat in the US, workers, youth, and activists can look to countries like Ireland and Argentina, who have won legalized abortion through incredible mass struggle in the past several years. Around the world, workers are struggling with the same problems under capitalism: the cost of living, overwhelming debt, sexism, racism, unsafe jobs, and unlivable pay. We can't fight back against global capitalism, imperialism, and the worldwide climate crisis unless workers around the planet link up our struggles and our organizations. That is why the Independent Socialist Group stands in political solidarity with the Committee for a Workers' International, fighting to build socialism in the US and around the world. As capitalism repeatedly proves, it cannot provide working people with a decent standard of living, basic human rights, or even a livable planet in the future. People are hungry for alternatives, hungry for these socialist ideas. In the month following the leaked reversal of Roe, which was Pride Month, the Independent Socialist Group campaigned on the demand to defend trans and reproductive rights, both which have come under recent attacks in the US, at as many pride and abortion rights events as we could attend. Because we put forward class demands, including building a mass movement for the legal right to an abortion, for universal, trans-inclusive health care, and universal child care paid for by taxing the rich. Because we put forward fighting methods based on the power of workers, youth, and unions. Because we argued for a new political party, free of corporate control, and an end to the exploitative, oppressive capitalist system. We sold out of our Pride edition of our print paper, which we just launched this January, outlining these ideas. 500 people signed up to learn more about our ideas and our small but growing organization. Our ideas and methods, as demonstrated in the abortion rights struggle, are adding to recent growth in the Independent Socialist Group, including establishing a new branch in the state of Maine. So with the right ideas and methods, organizations like ours, like the CWI, filled with determined revolutionary socialist fighters, can have an impact far beyond our apparent size. So if you are sick and tired of this rotten capitalist system, if you want to be a part of building a new socialist society, and you aren't already a member of the CWI, get organized with the CWI in your country today. Thank you.
Next speaker is Lucy from Portugal.
Thanks, comrade. Like that. In France, we see a rise of struggle with hunger that rose for many years against a bad job, unemployment, price rise, and disdain from the government. Even during the recent election and this summer, season that usually put the struggle in pause, many struggle and strike have been taking place in France for better wages, for working conditions and employment, including in public services. Emmanuel Macron is an adventurist, a liberal, who only serves the interests of the capitalist class. He was re-elected these years after a first mandate where he continuously attacked the worker and the youth. There were a lot of struggle. The Gilets jaunes movement sparked by high petrol price, the movement against the attempt attack a pension on the rail worker status, the destruction of the labor code. Here, he has always been the president of the rich. Macron has felt a lot of anger. This was reflected in the April presidential election. April presidential election, Mélenchon, candidate of the France Insoumise, who stood against these policies, won 7.7 million votes. Gauche Révolutionnaire, the French section of CWI, led a combative campaign to defend the most radical demands of the program and the need for a workers' party. The France Insoumise movement exists since 2016. It's a broad movement in which activists can organize in action group, to decide of their activities wherever they are. It's the same around Mélenchon that decides the rhythm and the political content carried by the movement. The political situation put Mélenchon candidacy on the only real opposition on the left against Macron and Le Pen, far right. It was radical and dynamic, even if its program is merely reformist and less anti-capitalist than in precedent election. These years, new activists joined the France Insoumise campaign with the consciousness, even fragile, of the need to organize. But France Insoumise has no democratic structure, and new militants can get fully involved. In 2017, after a strong mobilization, new groups were formed, but then many disappeared because of the structuration issue. Many people left their group because they have no power of decision. And because the absence of France Insoumise in many areas, the far right, so Rassemblement National in French, profit of the void and of the anti-Macron mood. On the contrary, where there are strong France Insoumise campaign, the vote for the far right dropped. Where Gauche Révolutionnaire was present, we could lead France Insoumise campaign as well as leading our own. We put forward demands against Macron, against capitalism. We called to organize, said that a party was needed, and to go campaign everywhere we workers are, to give power to the militants and not to the bureaucrats. During the presidential election, the outer left party refused to make an alliance. Even the Communist Party Because of that, Mélenchon did not make into the second round by only 2%. Then Mélenchon could really have changed Macron, and it would have changed the mood of French people, French workers. The France Insoumise program put forward concrete demands for the worker. The possibility to increase the living condition of everyone. Retirement at the age of 60. Benefit for the youth. And increase of the purchasing power with a rise of the minimum wages to 1,500 euros. Blocking and lowering of price, but no indication of the salaries on the cost of life. Only a fair nationalization with no expropriation and no question of who has control upon it. We put forward that for the working class victories to be permanent, the only way is to fit the system. The capitalist system with a socialist program. In 2020, the big struggle made to push back the attack on passion, but as long as we are under capitalism, no rights can ever be guaranteed. Just before the general election, Mélenchon pushed for a large alliance on the left. Around him, the NUPES, nouveau parti. New Party, écologique, social. The French Socialist Party and the Green displayed years of treason with the former President François Hollande. The unity on the left was made, but its basis was too limited programmatically. And it did not allow the clarification of the kind of program needed against Macron. However, with the risk of the political dilution that the new PS alliance posed, a lot of activists of the France Insoumise pushed the question of having a strong political tool, a party of their own, and not only a movement. The far right scored with 89, Marine Le Pen, far right, Rassemblement National, and the National Assembly. He was shocked. It's the first time they are so big. It also reflects the opposition against Macron. But in reality, their program a lot of common points with the Macron program. So we push to fight them both. That already start voting austerity law against a raise of the minimum wages to 1,500 euros, against blocking price, etc. About syndicate and social trade union and social struggle, the big strike from the winter 2019-2020 against the attack of pollution was stopped for 18 months because of the pandemic. During the autumn 2021, the French working class wanted to fight again and at the almost end of the sanitary restriction. Struggle continued today. However, the level of the working class struggle in France remained limited by the confused consciousness of the worker and with the low organization level. The struggle remained isolated from one another. The General Secretary of the CGT, the Mail Fighting Union in France, rejected Mélenchon's proposition for a national demonstration against the rising cost of life. That would add itself to the Interprofessional National Strike Day, 29th of September. But hunger is so urgent, and the cost of living is such a terrible issue. The workers are not prepared to suffer forever. The strike and wages that are taking place at the moment are only a small taste of what there it come. What it is to come. Understand me? The youth are also under pressure because they are attacked by Macron policies. Unemployment is high. He went to attack the retirement age, worsening the situation even more. There is a lot of precariousness with students, and it also impacts the mental health or some that's a sentence of their future. Living conditions are really hard, but some perceive that in not normal situation. So he went change that one condition, organizing with a program. We have recruited some young members during that period. One of them said that he wanted to take politics in our hands. Okay, politics in our hands for change to everything. That will be one of your tasks. Continue to intervene everywhere, in school, in university, to organize the youth, give them perspective, show what future we could obtain, and that for this, it is necessary to organize together with the worker in a mass party for socialism. Hunger and the will to fight are real. Gauche Revolutionnaire does everything it can for the most determined to join youth today. All together, organize, we can win.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Now we are going to show you a video about the Sri Lankan protests, also with a comrade who is a member of the struggle committee in Sri Lanka.
Hello, my name is Prasad Velikumbra. I'm a member of United Socialist Party Sri Lanka. If you look at Sri Lanka today, we are witnessing one of the largest protests organized in the region, in Sri Lanka. People call it Aragaled, which means the revolution. This protest has been broken loose due to the economic hardship most of the people are facing here in Sri Lanka. If you look at the past several years, after the Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the former president, and he came into power, he managed to get 6.9 million votes, and he also managed to secure 2/3 majority from the parliament. So in that way, when you look at constitutionally, he is one of the most strongest presidents ever existed in Sri Lanka. But the issue was he was lobbied by the Colombo businessmen and the corporations. Most of his policy decisions were made to protect businesses from collapsing and allowing them to make more profit out of the situations rather than helping people to have better living standards and providing them their basic necessities. The first set of protests has been started in 2020 April when the farmers taken into streets to oppose the only organic policy, where Gotabaya Rajapaksa decided that Sri Lanka should go only organic fertilizer for farming. This caused a huge crop loss, and farmers were demanding either to give them chemical fertilizers and give them compensation for the lost harvest due to this ignorant policy. And several months later, the teachers and the principals of Sri Lanka who came into street and start demanding to abolish their pay differences they had. And this protest was going on for more than a month, and finally they managed to win their demands. With all this, government was largely ignorant about the people's demand about higher living costs and lack of basic necessities in the country. When it comes to the February, in February-March period in 2022, there was a huge shortage in fuel, and there is hours-long electricity cuts, and this put enormous pressure on the Sri Lanka's middle class, because they were with the COVID situation. After the COVID situation, most of them started working from home, and most of them were using internet and electricity while they're working. Most of them were using internet, and with the 13 hours plus power cuts, they weren't managed to complete their work, and that was affecting them. So most of the people, there was a large group of people spontaneously came into junctions and started to do small-scale protest, and this has been going on for a while. And on the March 29th, there had been quite a large protest in Mirihana, which is a suburb of Colombo, and President Rajapaksa's house was very close to this place, and protesters decided to go there and start protesting in front of that house. And it was a peaceful protest, but police used water cannons and tear gas to remove protesters. When the tear gas and water cannons came in and attacked the protesters, thousands of people who are residents in surrounding area came into streets, and they came into street supporting the protesters. So the whole this spontaneous protests started to merge into like larger people's struggle. And on the 9th of April, more than 100,000 people came into Goldface Colombo, which is a ground near Colombo 1, and next to the President's office and President's palace, and they started a Occupy movement. Right now, it is going on for almost 4 months, and they were demanding President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his family to leave politics. And even though they say Gotabaya Rajapaksa should resign, that doesn't mean that he should be like. It is not about he is resigning. It is about the corrupted system he created to be abolished. That was the actual demand of the protesters. And on the May 9th, 1 month after the occupation started, Mahinda Rajapaksa invited their provincial council members and local body council members, and they were sent to Goldface ground to attack the protesters. When that happened, there were thousands of people around the Sri Lanka came into street and tried and attacked houses and businesses belonging to the governing party politicians, and this has created some sort of riot around the country. And then Prime Minister, current President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's brother Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned after that event. And with the time, current President Ranil Wickremesinghe, then he was just a minister, has assumed the duties in Prime Ministership. And after that, there was a small setback in the protest, but it was continued to go on. On the July 9th, protesters asked people to come to Colombo come to Goldface and stage a very large protest. And on that day, there were more than 1 million people showed up, and they managed to capture president's office, president's palace, and prime minister's official residence. They started occupying it. They opened the presidential palace for the people to visit, and that made Gotabaya Rajapaksa, then president, to flee the country. He first flee to Maldives, and from there he went to Singapore. As per the constitution, then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was appointed as the acting president at that time, and on the 20th of July, through parliamentary vote, he was elected as the president of Sri Lanka. And soon after he came into power, he started to cracking down the Occupy movement, currently called the Aragalaya, which means revolution. And more than 2,500 people were arrested, and some of them were issued travel bans. And he is continuing to crack down the protest, and he is using all the provisions within the constitution, which is made to protect the rulers, not the people, to crush down the protest. Still, there are a large number of people who are occupying the protest ground, and they are willing to stay there until their demands are met.
Next speaker is Sinan, who's already standing, followed by Rob.
Thanks, Rene. Unfortunately, Comrade Prasad could not be here today because of visa difficulties. You can see that he is very tired. He's day and night outside with the protesters, and managed to do this small video to summarize what's going on and send it to us. But what we see in Sri Lanka now is an unimaginable misery that the world population is subject to, and what sort of uprising that it can cause. Never in history has a whole country ran out of food, fuel, and essentials. The whole country just ran out of it. But the corrupted capitalists and the rulers are telling the population that the worst is to come. This is not this. You'll have to put up with it more, while protecting their wealth that they looted very carefully. There is no loss of profit still, even in this crisis for them. And the solution, they say, is further borrowing. Attack on the living conditions more is the solution that they all agree on unanimously at this stage. Of course, the genocidal war against the Tamil population and the pandemic have accelerated the crisis. But in essence, Sri Lanka stands as a fine example of utter failure of capitalism. The decade-long neoliberal policy, combined with the world situation that is the crisis of capitalism, is the main reason behind the crisis. Even in the industrial nations, where most of the kind of wealth is kind of controlled, accumulated, they still have an option of some concession to the masses, to hold back the masses, and so on and so forth. Though here also, this enormous amount of wealth is held back from the population, and the populations are expected to kind of wear additional clothes during the coming winter, for example, and so on. Imagine the situation in the neo-colonial countries. They have no options whatsoever to hold back the angry masses. The uprising, that's why it's taking place in a number of countries. All capitalist measures are further aggravating the crisis than solving it, hence provoking this unstoppable mass movement. the ex-rulers, the infamous Rajapaksa family, used to be hated by the Tamils. It's no longer the case. They are hated not just in Sri Lanka by everybody, but the whole region hates them. But even in Singapore, they couldn't keep it. They're trying to get him out soon as possible, even in Singapore. Trying to escape, and the USA refused visa, for example, because the people are visiting their home in the USA. He's driven out at the moment. However, but how it happened, okay, Prasad explained, it was a genuine, very big mass movement that broke through several layers of barricades and barriers with the army standing, shooting at them, etc., etc. It's a determined movement to get him out, and they could not stop them achieving this particular goal. But having taken control of these palaces and the buildings, which were empty when they moved in, which also kind of point to the point that it's kind of the real power can be established by the mass movement outside the walls of these capitalist institutions. Once the movement took control of the presidential palace, they made it into a museum. They were able to see the large population who was in struggle, the different quality of life that they're leading, and these palaces and the luxury cars and all these things, the life they have got. That is clear for people that there is difference. Sharp difference exists, and they are not going to accept this anymore. But the Sri Lankan parliament, in turn, now have declared war on this protest. You have seen comrades talking about massive mass arrest, the repression that is taking place right now. They appointed, however, what's the solution now is happening from their point of view. They appointed the lead defenders of the neoliberal policies and the close ally of the Rajapaksa family as a president in a so-called secret ballot in the parliament and election. But then also another close ally of Rajapaksa, now appointed as the prime minister. The whole cabinet is re-elected. Again, this is a situation that is it. It's a direct provocation. The masses are not gone away, but this repression has pushed them back a little bit. The military isn't put in place right now. The full control of the country, the whole country is given to this military. The section of the military that they are using is the loyal forces that these Rajapaksa families had, which committed war crimes and heinous crimes in the north during the war. And they could do the same in the south again. That's the danger that all of them are facing right now. That is, even in this situation, it's not much reported inside Sri Lanka. Now it's reported here in the Guardian internationally, is that Gotabaya could go back to Sri Lanka. There will be more of a provocation. As an agent of China, for example, the Chinese shipped military naval force moved into one of the ports recently. There's a geopolitical tension. So this is the kind of competing forces trying to use this the repression as a way into kind of finding back the control in Sri Lanka. But it was clear from the point of view of the people, the Aragalaya, the comrade talk about the opposition on the street, is that they reject the Ranil rule, and they say, go home Ranil, everything is renamed now, go home Gotabaya in the past, renamed now, go home Ranil, and take 225 MPs with you. That's it, we reject all of you. That's the kind of a slogan that is emerging now. That's very clear in the movement. How it's going to develop is a different question. We in the CWI and the United Socialist Party in Sri Lanka argue that the masses have shown enough strength already to take forward beyond just the call of this Dagash, get out, slogan that emerged in Tunisia against the Ben Ali. And then we say that they run, but we can also decide what follows after they go home. We don't want the same parliamentarians who so far collaborated with the brutal killings, the corruption, the acute exploitation that leveled on the masses to return back to the power. They're now trying to, some of them distance themselves from the Rajapaksa families to present themselves as new, which is not enough. They have a history. The mass movement and the general strike shown that the new beginning can happen for Sri Lanka. And that is a key feature now across the world, and so on. But But this particular power the mass power that has been shown, should take an organizational form that we argue. Democratically organized committees should be formed, need to be built in workplaces, the towns and villages, etc. It can lead to a national body that can continue to articulate the desire and the demands of the masses. This also is the best defense actually against the repression. Of course, in addition to that, the movement, we also appeal to the movement to take on the demands of the Tamils and the other minority population. The Tamil Solidarity present here put forward certain demands that movement should take on in order to, including the right to self-determination, in order to kind of draw in the Tamil masses also into the movement. And then through that, we could establish a revolutionary constituent assembly to start discussion about how we can plan, implement immediate economic policies, implementing capital control, distribution of essential commodities and foods, and taking the wealth of the wealthy people, and also in nationalizing key industries already been privatized, etc., and so on. They call for the democratic elected revolutionary committee, the Constitution Assembly, can oversee these organizations, this kind of action, but at the same time leading towards the workers-led government. So we, the workers and the youth and the poor, collectively moving towards these ideas, practically a socialist policies and action is the only way out that exists. Not just in Sri Lanka, we would argue across the world, in Britain and everywhere. There is no other way out. It's very clear from the point of the bourgeoisie and from the point of view of the working people right now. As you can see, that at the moment, massive number of arrests are taking place in Sri Lanka, over thousands of people getting arrested at the moment. The comrades asked us to send us a solidarity message from the school. Basically, Committee for Workers International strongly condemns the attack on protesters and demands that immediate release of all these arrested, and CWI stand in solidarity with the struggling masses in the movement. And we send small, if you agree, and then we can send that to them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think we all strongly agree with sending a solidarity message to the struggling masses in Sri Lanka, right? Next speaker in line is Rob Williams, followed by Pamela from Chile.
This strike waves murder in Britain. The days are long, you get up early in the morning, and for the third time in 4 days, then we have been getting up early this week to visit the picket lines that have been taking place. And we've been telling the comrades that have come to this school that there's a strike wave developing in Britain, and I think they know, because this morning myself and Farah from North London, we were on the picket line at Euston there with about half a dozen ASLEF pickets. And I said, well, I think we're going to get a couple of visitors come along because we've got a meeting going on. And then just around the corner, about 20 or 30 of the comrades came walking down to the picket line, and the ASLEF pickets went, oh, what's coming our way? But actually they were delighted. And the comrades had a treat. Well, it was a treat for Jeremy Corbyn because he visited the picket line. And I think the comrades sold him a paper, the French paper. So I think you know now. There is actually a strike wave taking place in Britain that is developing, and we should remind ourselves that 2 years ago, the bulk of the trade union leaders in Britain capitulated to national unity at the start of the pandemic. But we said then that the difference between the trade unions is that the leaders have to be a little bit more sensitive to the moods of the members, and of course, we have seen that develop. And comrades, as the rail strike spiked in particular, but others as well, then of course we've seen the prospect of the two would-be Tory Prime Ministers falling over themselves, trying to appeal to the enlightened electorate of 160,000 reactionary Tory party members, falling over themselves to threaten even more anti-union laws. But of course, we should say, shouldn't we, that I thought we had been told all the time that the trade unions are finished, that the trade unions are weak, that it's all in the past, and yet you have a few strikes, and of course the trade unions are too strong. But we should issue a warning to Truss and Sunak that it takes more than wearing blue dresses to recreate the spectre of Thatcher in Britain. It's precisely because they are weak, they are divided and crisis-ridden, that the Tories are gnashing their teeth at the moment, while workers are moving onto the front foot, spurred on by the cost of the living spiralling out of control. But we should issue this warning. Yes, the Tories are divided. Yes, the Tories are weak. But the unions must face up to the Tory threats and press home the momentum and the advantage that is building up. Comrades, over these 6 days alone, I have estimated that upwards of 100,000 workers are taking national strike action across the RMT, ASLEF, TSSA and the CWU. And of course, as well as that, the CWU have just won a ballot of 115,000 postal workers in Royal Mail that voted just about by 97.6% to take strike action. And of course, many of those workers are winning those disputes. Some of them by not even taking strike action, but some of them, like the Coventry bin workers, taking 7 months of strike action. And it is our pleasure to echo the call that they have won their dispute in Coventry, defeating a Labour council. And I'm sure the bin workers would agree that the role of this party, and particularly the role of the comrades in Coventry, has been an absolutely key factor in that victory. Comrades, with inflation continuing to arise, this strike wave can continue to grow, and the unions can become a pole of attraction to workers, including those that aren't organised and those, like most of them, with their backs against the wall. And the very weakness of this Tory government is giving confidence to workers that it's possible to win. I've just been in an interview when a question was put to me, well, we can't pay all the workers a pay rise, can we? Well, what about Centrica, that have just announced £1.3 billion profit for the last 6 months? Centrica, who own British Gas. Centrica, that reduced the wages of their British gas workers by £10,000 during the pandemic through fire and rehire. That's why we have to demand that the energy companies, the rail companies, and all those companies should be taken back into public ownership under workers' control and management. Comrades, summertime has normally been a quiet period for the trade union movement in Britain. Sometimes all the months have been a quiet period for the trade union movement in Britain, but there's going to be no winding down this year. In August, the RMT are planning to strike again on London Underground. They're taking 2 more days of national action. ASLEF will be taking action, and TSSA are going to be taking action in 11 train operating companies. And of course, with comrades in this room involved in this, in addition, after the summer, then it looks like the bulk, if not all, the public sector unions are going to be pushing their leaders to organise strike ballots in those unions. Comrades, 11 years ago, 29 unions met at the TUC Congress to agree coordinating their national strike ballots that led directly to the N30 pension strike that November that saw 2 million workers take effectively public sector general strike action to defend their pensions. That is what is needed right now, but this time the fight needs to be carried through to the end. Comrades will know this, but on the 11th of September, the NSSN is again lobbying TUC Congress, this time in Brighton, on Sunday of September 11th, around the call of the unions striking us together. And I would say, if you're here, join us in Brighton, spread the word. Let's build that into a mass demonstration, a mass lobby of the TUC. But this time, comrades, the potential is even greater. If we remember back in 2011, The Tories tried to play off the workers in the public sector from the private sector. They can't do that because all workers now need a pay rise to keep their heads above water. Even the barristers and doctors are taking action right now at the moment. But the question is, what is our role? What is the role of this party in this? Our party stood out against the capitulation of national unity on the NECs of trade unions and on the shop floor back in 2020. And right now we have to act as a lever. We have to push. We have to put the demands forward to take the movement forward. We welcome the comments over the last couple of days from Mick Lynch, from John McDonnell on coordinating action. The discussion is out there. Discussion is live, and we have to assume a big credit for that particular case. In one interview, Mick Lynch reminded an interviewer that it was a Tory government 50 years ago, virtually to the day, that a Tory government jailed 5 dockers in Pentonville prison for taking industrial action and defying Tory anti-union laws. I asked the leader of the CWI union, Dave Ward, if he'd like to speak at our rally, and I hope Dave speaks at the NSSN rally. But he then gave a speech to the picket line on the BT picket, and he said, "We believe it is time to consider calling for forms of collective action that every worker can participate in." Now, I've got a word for that, or 2 words. But the point is that we have to keep fighting for that. Now, comrades, Truss in particular at the moment is attempting to style herself on Thatcher. Although we have to remember, Thatcher wasn't invincible and could have been defeated in the mid-1980s if the union leaders had mobilised to defend the miners. Of course, she was defeated ultimately. It was the mighty poll tax movement, which our party, our predecessor, Militant, played the key role in that ended Thatcher's reign of terror on the working class. But these present-day Tories are out of time, or they should be, if the unions face up to the situation and come together right now in a joint struggle. Because whoever wins the Tory leadership election will be presiding over another government of crisis to follow on from those of Cameron, from May and Johnson. There is the real prospect right now, in the next few months, of the working class movement expelling from office a Tory government like it did effectively in 1974 to Heath. That poses the need for a political alternative. Starmer's recent backsliding over nationalisation, his refusal to back the strikes, his sacking of Sam Terry from the shadow cabinet for going on a picket line shows that the closer he feels he is getting to Downing Street, the more he is going to double down on presenting his new Labour as safe for big business. More and more workers, while determined to get rid of the Tories, at the same time see the need to build a party that represents their interests. Don't forget, the Coventry bin workers defeated a Labour council in Coventry that was willing to spend millions to try and break their strike. Comrades, the industrial and the political fight go on together. Fighting for the pay rise the workers desperately need increasingly raises the need to bring down this Tory government. That would totally transform in Britain the balance of class forces, raising the confidence of workers in their power, and put any new government, yes, even a Starmer government, under severe pressure. But that would be helped immeasurably if workers had their own political vehicle, their own mass political vehicle. That's why we say to Jeremy Corbyn and even Sam Tarry, don't just stand on the picket line, stand out politically, stand politically against Starmer's Labour Party. Do what we do, unapologetically supporting workers in struggle, unashamedly committed to policies such as repealing all the Tory anti-union laws going back to Thatcher herself, left on the statute book by Blair Brown, as well as socialist renationalisation of rail and transport and the energy companies and the utilities. The need for such a political strategy by the unions can't be postponed, and we want workers to join us in that fight. Comrades, these are stormy events. They're going to get stormier. The workers are on the march, but we are almost alone. We were almost alone in having the confidence that workers would fight back. Almost, virtually, actually, absolutely alone in fighting for a political strategy for the trade unions. We are becoming a factor. We are a factor. That's what we got to build. Solidarity.
Thanks a lot. Next speaker is Camila, followed by Peter.
Buenas tardes, compañeros. I'm Pamela. I'm from Chile, and I need help. Bueno, yo vengo de Chile, de América Latina,
I'm from Chile in America and Latin America,
un continente que está constantemente convulsionado,
a continent that has seen multiple convulsions,
donde los trabajadores luchan todo el tiempo por una vida digna.
where workers are always fighting for a life worthwhile living.
Tenemos el estallido en Colombia, las movilizaciones en Perú,
We've had outbursts in Colombia, mobilizations in Peru,
los trabajadores argentinos que constantemente están en lucha,
the Argentinian workers always fighting,
y el estallido social que tuvimos nosotros en Chile en el 2019.
and the social outburst that we had in Chile in 2019.
El estallido social de Chile es muy similar a lo que pasó en Sri Lanka.
Chile's social outburst is very similar to what happened in Sri Lanka.
Este se originó por el aumento en 30 pesos del transporte público.
This outburst was sparked by the rise of 30 pesos in the cost of public transport.
Pero la verdad es que eso fue la gota que rebalsó el vaso.
But that was the last drop that made the glass overflow.
Los jóvenes iniciaron la lucha
It was the young people who started the struggle.
y después, por supuesto, nos unimos todo el pueblo.
And afterwards, of course, the whole people united for it.
Cientos de trabajadores, jóvenes, mujeres, salimos a la calle a luchar.
Hundreds of young workers and women, we came out to the streets to struggle,
A decir basta de una mala atención de salud.
to say stop to this attention to healthcare,
Basta de una educación de mercado.
to enough of market education,
Basta de pensiones de hambre.
enough of pensions made of hunger,
Basta de falta de vivienda.
enough of lack of housing,
Basta de opresión al pueblo originario, al pueblo mapuche de Chile.
and enough oppression, no more oppression to the Mapuche people, the original people of Chile.
El presidente Sebastián Piñera pudo haber sido derrocado la primera semana del estallido social.
President Sebastián Piñera could have been defeated in the first week of the social outburst.
Afortunadamente fue, entre comillas, salvado por la casta política que hay en Chile.
But he was saved by the political caste that there is in Chile.
Afortunadamente para él.
Fortunately for him.
Como dije, la juventud fue la que inició la revuelta social.
It was the youth who started the social outburst.
Jóvenes que estuvieron dispuestos a salir a la calle e inclusive hasta dar su vida en contra de la opresión.
Young people who were willing to go out in the streets and even give their life in the fight against oppression.
Y el costo que se pagó fue muy elevado.
And the cost of that was very high.
Igual que en Sri Lanka, la represión del gobierno fue brutal.
The same as in Sri Lanka, the repression of the government was brutal.
Hubieron decenas de muertos,
There were tens of deaths.
muchas personas con daños oculares.
Many people with damages in the eyes.
Un estudiante universitario que lo dejaron ciego en la policía en Chile.
A university student was left blind by the police.
Y hubieron alrededor de 400 personas con problemas de visión.
And there were around 400 people who were left with seeing problems.
En una de las comunas de Santiago, un día una trabajadora salió con dirección a su trabajo.
In one of the regions in Santiago, one of the workers came out of her job to go home.
Y fue atacada en su rostro por un policía.
And was attacked in her face by a police officer.
Ella perdió su vista, quedó ciega.
She was rendered blind.
Su cara está deformada,
Her face is deformed.
perdió el olfato.
She lost her sense of smell.
Lo cierto es que todos pensamos que ella iba a morir.
We thought that she was going to die.
Hoy en día ella es senadora de la República en Chile.
Today, she's a senator for the Republic of Chile.
Se candidateó en forma independiente
She was an independent candidate,
y sacó la primera mayoría nacional.
and she managed to get the first national majority.
También hubieron situaciones que a los más adultos nos impresionaron.
There were also situations that really impressed us, the more adult ones.
La represión también utilizó métodos que usó la dictadura de Augusto Pinochet.
The repression used the same methods that the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet used.
Con algunos trabajadores hubieron simulacros de asesinato.
There were even simulacrums of murder.
Algunas personas fueron secuestradas en la vía pública.
Some were kidnapped in the streets,
Y ellos tenían que gritar su nombre y su número de identificación, igual como ocurría durante la dictadura.
and they had to shout their number and their name and their ID number, just as they did during the dictatorship.
El actual presidente de Chile, Gabriel Boric,
The current president of Chile, Gabriel Boric,
quien supuestamente era el candidato de la izquierda,
supposedly the so-called left-wing candidate,
y en quien mucha gente tenía mucha esperanza,
and who drew a lot of illusions from a lot of people,
y quien asumió la presidencia en marzo de este año,
and who became president in March of this year,
giró brutalmente hacia la derecha.
made a brutal rightwards shift.
El cambio fue asombroso.
The change was incredible.
Él era partícipe de todas las demandas que el pueblo pidió durante el estallido social.
Initially, he favored all the demands that the social outburst was asking for,
Pero ninguna de estas demandas han sido cumplidas.
but he has not fulfilled any of those demands.
Entre ellas la libertad de los presos políticos de la revuelta,
Among them, the liberation of the political prisoners of the revolt,
de los jóvenes que salieron a luchar y crearon la primera línea
of the young people that came out to struggle and were the first line.
y fueron detenidos y todavía permanecen en prisión preventiva.
They were detained and they're still in preventive prison.
En este minuto en Chile estamos en una, entre comillas, pausa,
In this moment in Chile, we are in a bit of a pause,
porque estamos esperando la votación del cambio de la Constitución,
waiting for the vote about the change in the Constitution,
que fue una de las cosas que se consiguió gracias a la movilización y al estallido social.
which was one of the things that was achieved through the mobilization and the social outburst.
Claro, nosotros pedimos el cambio de la Constitución escrita por la dictadura de Augusto Pinochet,
We demand the change of the Constitution, this Constitution written by Augusto Pinochet,
que como dije ayer fue escrita con fusil y sangre del pueblo trabajador en Chile.
as I said yesterday, was written with blood and with with rifles and with the blood of the Chilean people,
Del pueblo trabajador que participó fue parte de la Unidad Popular del gobierno de Salvador Allende.
of the working people that was part of the Popular Unity Government of Salvador Allende,
Un pueblo consciente que estaba luchando por unos verdaderos cambios.
a conscious people that was fighting for true change.
Como dije, la juventud fue fundamental en el estallido social,
The youth was fundamental in the social outburst,
pero lamentablemente la juventud está desilusionada de los partidos políticos,
but sadly the youth is disappointed with political parties,
de los partidos que en algún minuto fueron de izquierda y que representaron a los trabajadores.
even of those parties that once they were left-wing and represented the workers.
No existe alternativa política para los trabajadores y la juventud en Chile en estos minutos.
There is no political alternative for the youth and for the workers in Chile at the present moment.
Por eso la sección chilena está luchando.
That's why the Chilean section is fighting.
Somos una sección pequeña,
We're a small section,
pero compañeros, ténganlo presente y claro.
but comrades, have this clear.
Nosotros luchamos todos los días
We fight every day
por crear una organización política y revolucionaria
to create a political and revolutionary organization
para poder cambiar el sistema.
to be able to change the system.
Y por último,
And lastly,
sin mujeres no hay revolución.
without women, there's no revolution.
Thank you very much, Pamela, for your contribution. Thanks, Luis, for translating. Now it's Peter's turn, and after Peter, the financial appeal will be introduced by Helen.
Comrade Chair and comrades, previously at schools of this character, or international events, or international meetings, we point to the changes in the world situation in order to prepare for the upheavals to come and what that means for our work. But we are now confronted by an entirely unique conjuncture where there are already mass upheavals, as the discussion so far has clearly demonstrated, and impending social explosions like in Sri Lanka. It's not been mentioned yet, but also like in Baghdad the other day, out of a seemingly clear sky, we read or heard on the news and experienced on the television of a mass upheaval in Iraq, which was reflecting processes not just in Iraq, but in Iran, where the masses were fed up with the rotten regime that still remained in the aftermath of the invasion of Iraq. The global turmoil is such you could stick a pin in a map of the world, of this country and the world, and above all you would see it's been reflected in the marvellous contributions from this platform from young and old comrades. There are hardly any stable periods for capitalism at the present time. Above all, it represents the re-emergence of mass movements of all exploited layers in society, but particularly of the working class. Look at events in Britain, which have been touched on by Rob and other comrades, or the events in the US touched on by Claire, but above all symbolised, in my opinion, by the mighty events in Sri Lanka, where there's a vacuum in society, where the masses could take power today and unleash a movement in the whole of Asia, which could be the beginning of the socialist transformation, not just of Asia, but would be a beacon to the working class of the world. One of the few bourgeois representatives in Sri Lanka that was prepared to go into the press, compared the situation in that country as existing on death row. Well, we've got a message for him. You won't be long on death row. Your system will disappear into history if the masses in Sri Lanka had leaders equal to them in the struggle against landlordism and capitalism. And Sri Lanka is a country very dear to us. I've visited many times. There are comrades here sitting on this platform who've been there. It's one of the few countries in the world where Trotskyism became a mass phenomenon. And now, unfortunately, because of the opportunist mistakes of the leaders of the LSSP and others, is now not in a position to win the masses and to take power. But that is coming, believe you me, with the mass upheavals that have been described. We made the point in the past that ultimately, in the neo-colonial world in particular, it's not just there now, but it's generalised throughout world capitalism. Socialism or barbarism is the real choice that is before the working class. Archaic social relations are no longer capable of taking society forward on the basis of capitalism. It's not just the future, it's here now, as the contributions so far have demonstrated. Moreover, similar features of the neo-colonial world exist in Britain, don't they? With the existence of the poor and the way that the ruling class is prepared to treat them at the present time in the working class. The chief characteristic in the situation is mass discontent that will be followed or has been followed by massive upheaval with no real solution to the problems created by capitalism on the horizon. In Asia, Africa, Latin America, there are very few bright spots, if any. No lasting solutions are on offer by the parties of the bourgeois, by capitalists. There are temporary palliatives which hardly begin to solve the problem, but they collapse or are withdrawn almost as soon as they are embraced. Now, what conclusion can we draw from this? We, the CWI, the conscious expression, we believe, of Marxism, despite the smallness of forces that might exist, now genuine Marxism is in a situation where we're the only ones who can offer a clear analysis, a clear way forward for working people, not just in Britain, but internationally, and can offer up the alternative of a social system that can begin to transform the conditions of working people very quickly. Above all, this needs theoretical and political clarity, which in turn leads to bold interventions, of which we've achieved many. Comrades mentioned here today the successes that we had in Liverpool. Remember, we were one of the very few parties through the mass movement in Liverpool, and I've written, together with the late Tony Mulhern, a book on the experiences that defeated Thatcher. We repeated that when we defeated her poll tax in the mass battles of the past. That was an example. If it would have been taken up by the Labour movement, would not mean that we'd be in the sorry state that we're in the present time. That's what this party, when it was militant, and the Socialist Party achieved, and they will be achieved in the not too distant future once more on the basis of the clarity of the ideas that have been put forward. Capitalism is in a historical cul-de-sac. Not one region of the world faces favourable prospects. Also, the other feature is the speed of events, the mighty speed of events. Not in my lifetime have I experienced these kind of situations. Look at the US. There's an element of civil war, which Claire described in the situation in the US with Trump's reactionary programme, provoking opposition, not just from the working class, but broad swathes of the middle class as well, and on such issues as abortion and open state repression. And as a result of this, by the way, it's not certain that Trump can remain as the candidate of the Republican Party, such as in the forthcoming presidential elections or the presidential elections that is posed in America in the next period, that the candidate for the Republican Party, he could be pushed aside by another reactionary element who can try and carry through Trumpism without Trump. This also raises the role of the Democrats, the so-called left party in the US, of Britain, whose popularity, despite the catastrophic situation in the US, is in the doldrums. All this means big opportunities for small forces with a clarity of programme and perspectives intervening in the situation can grow exponentially and become significant factors in very short-term developments. We see the effects in Britain in the unprecedented turmoil created by the unspeakable Johnson, and now by the equally ludicrous Tory alternative rich boy Sunak, and the reincarnation or an attempted reincarnation of Thatcher in the disastrous Liz Truss. Remember, this is a ruling class that once through its empire ruled 1/4 of humankind. Now they can't even control their own mouthpiece, the Tory party, which is reactionary and undemocratic to a fault. It provoked a comment in the newspaper from Yasmin Ali Bar Brown, who came from Africa and looked towards the mother of parliaments and the democracy of Britain as a model. They used to base themselves upon this, and now she's denouncing the Tory government as more reactionary than the most reactionary forces in Africa itself. The European bourgeois and capitalists are not much better. Even the most successful in the past, like Germany, which had a certain economic development, now staring economic slowdown and maybe even disaster in the face as a result of the economic consequences, or one of the consequences of the Russian-Ukrainian war, with the choking off of gas and therefore altering the economic perspectives for Germany. It will lead, as our German comrades have explained, to the impoverishment, even in prosperous Germany, to broad layers of the working class. Other bourgeois countries, indeed, Europe as a whole, face real economic impoverishment. Witness Italy, with the collapse of the Draghi government. And now, after the Italian workers defeated Mussolini, they now face the prospect of the fascist brothers of Italy. There's nothing brotherly about the fascists in Italy, by the way, threatening to participate in a coalition with other bourgeois forces. This will enrage, we will predict, swathes of the Italian workers. Similar colossal upheavals are coming here in Britain. Impoverished wages, cuts to living standards that Rob pointed out, disastrous housing conditions are storing up outrage. It's already there in the working class. It's not being given expression because there's no party at the present time which is equal to the task. It's symbolised by some union leaders who up to now have not reflected the boiling anger of the working class, but no longer are able to hold back the strikes, as Rob pointed out, most notably of rail workers. Mick Lynch, General Secretary of the RMT, was not considered particularly left in the past, but he's come out in the last few days, in a very confused way, it's true, for the general strike, and has even invoked the historical symbols of the suffragettes, who were, in their best elements anyway, represented a revolutionary threat to the British bourgeoisie, and the Chartists, who were the first independent movement of the working class. That's what events have done to one trade union leader. Contrast that. We just had a speaker, a very good speaker from Chile. But contrast that with the pink Tory. They have the fear about a pink wave in Latin America, but the pink Tory, Sir Keir Starmer, who wants to stop the red wave of solidarity and a militant trade union with a pink wave. You watch, we'll go over the colours for Labour in the future will not be red, it will be pink if he has his way. He tried to stop Labour MPs from going on picket lines. As Rob explained, it's quite, I had to rub my eyes in disbelief, given the history of the movement and the battles we've been involved in. The solidarity of pickets is a basic trade union principle. And then they took this unsuspecting Labour MP for the outskirts, Sam Tarry. I was due to appear with him on LBC this morning to defend him against Starmer. It was cancelled. It was cancelled by text, by the way. Not even a letter, not even a phone call. It's all Peter this and Peter that when they want you to go on the radio. But I was a non-person all of a sudden. But my daughter, Nancy Taff, who's in this audience, a member of the party, of course, otherwise I wouldn't mention that. But she phoned up LBC, or she phoned me, and when I said I've been nullified, I've been cancelled, I no longer exist, she was so outraged, she phoned LBC and they put her on. And by the way, I have to say this, she did a much better job than I would have done in a ferocious approach to the situation. We're not surprised. We pointed out the past record of this. We're not being taken by surprise by Starmer. We knew what he was, even before he became the Labour leadership. He was the Director of Public Prosecutions. We'll never forget this. Things don't happen accidentally. That when the heroic students invaded the Tory headquarters, he was the Director of Public Prosecutions that dragged them before capitalist courts. It's an absolute scandal that somebody like that is in a leadership position in the Labour movement itself. This was followed by a period where he got denounced by ex-members of militants and so on. If Starmer continues like this, and he will do in one form or another, it's likely to finally put the nails in the coffin of what is a party that's no longer, that is unable to represent the potentially mighty British working class. And it is mighty in its traditions. It's slow to move. It ponders events. It has characteristics which perhaps the Spanish and the Italian move much more quickly. But once the British workers make a conquest, it's well nigh impossible to take it away from them. Look at the stubborn reaction of the railwaymen and others as well. And if this party, with this rotten leadership, acts against Labour MPs appearing on picket lines, it's like saying to Keir Hardie, how would you like to go? You can't go on picket lines, because that's not done in the modern Labour Party. When this Keir Hardie, as Nancy pointed out to me today, actually said to the miners in Scotland, as part of the argument to set up a Labour Party, I can then defend you when you go out on strike. It's an absolute scandal that we've got people like this. But one thing is clear, there is no possibility of prosperity or a good life for the mass of the people. The international working class cannot escape the ravages of a capitalism under class battles. If we weren't here, class battles would unfold, with or without leadership. But the sacrifices can be avoided, the movement can be compressed by a movement that has the mass organisation and a leadership with a Marxist training. Comrades, this conference of the CWI is in a sense a reconstitution because of the problems that we've had. It's not a reconstitution, but it's tying the knot of history together. It's a marvellous achievement that we've got so many comrades here. We've had a lot of illnesses with comrades and so on. But the determination of the working class is summed up sometimes by a few people. On a world scale, a movement is coming, not just in one country, but on a European scale. I haven't got time to deal with the very good contribution the comrade from France made in relation to Mélenchon. And it was mentioned about Jeremy Corbyn appearing on the picket line this morning for the strike. It's very good. But all of the misery that has been created by Starmer, that could have been avoided if Jeremy, when he was challenged, would have raised a new flag to either kick out the right wing in the Labour Party, do to them what they're trying to do to the left today, with more historical justification, by the way, or, if that proves to be impossible, create a new party. We have little time now to organise and create a movement which will really be worthy of the British working class. We have an example, as was mentioned by the French comrade, of Mélenchon's anti-capitalist alliance. And it's very good, the examples there. I have no time to deal with this. It's not the last word. If you're checked in one direction, take another one. And this will have an effect on the movements itself. There are similar developments taking place in the rest of Europe. Events have shown that even without a conscious factor in the form of a party, summed up by ourselves as well, that can represent the conscious factor within that, the working class is compelled to resist the capitalist offensive. We will intervene in this process energetically. You will, particularly the new generation with new, educated and trained Marxist cadres. There's no primrose path for the working class. It's through struggle and battle that they learn and prepare themselves for the future. That above all is true of the youth. We can win the best of the working class and the youth to the great vision of socialism and imbue them with the idea of struggle and eclipse all the victories that we had in the past. The CWI can play a great role with your work in mobilising the best layers of the youth and the working class to realise the great goal of socialism, not in a dim and distant future, but in your lifetime, if not in mine. And in this way, we can transform the world and write a new chapter, not just for the working class, but for the whole of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Now it's time for our financial appeals. Thank you very much, Helen. Comrades continue to go around with buckets to collect more donations. While they are doing that, we are going to show you a short video of Comrade Soweto from Nigeria, who unfortunately couldn't.
I bring you greetings from the Democratic Socialist Movement, CWI Nigeria, on this occasion of the first in-person summer school, which is being organized after so many years due to the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, the world is in the grip of a global capitalist economic crisis, worse than environmental crisis. These are features of the death agony of capitalism. In the neo-colonial world, the death agony of capitalism is manifested in various ways, especially in Nigeria, which for all intent and purposes is a country practically flowing in milk and honey. We see the manifestation of capitalist failure in many ways. First and foremost, Nigeria has become a poster boy for capitalist failure. It has become the poverty capital of the world, despite the existence of the resources and wealth necessary to sustain human life and a prosperous and harmonious human existence. Today, the country is in the grip of hunger and starvation and a cost of living crisis. Fuel price has been hiked, as well as other basic necessities to support human life. While it is true that this is a product of the effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it is also a product of the contradictions in the capitalist system in Nigeria itself. Nigeria is being ruled by a very backward prebender ruling elite, which operate in the typical fashion of gangsters. They are only there to share the wealth and take the money out of the country. They have little interest in even permitting a limited growth, of the capitalist economy. And that is why, despite the long period of growth at a period in the first period of the millennium, Nigeria, the condition of average Nigerians did not change. And that is why, with the onset of a renewed economic crisis in Nigeria, the working masses are likely to reach the conclusion that there is far more that is responsible for their problem beyond just the question of corruption and looting of Nigeria, which is clearly a problem. But the capitalist economic system remains the major reason why Nigeria remains in the grip of mass poverty despite the abundance of resources to make life better for all. 7 years ago, the Buhari All Progressive Congress regime came into power with the promise, to begin to resolve all of these problems. 7 years after, none of the problems the Buhari regime promised to resolve have been resolved. But even more crises have now been introduced by this current regime. For instance, economically, Nigeria has experienced 2 recessions in the last few years. Apart from this, all of the pre-existing crises within the polity, especially the national question, the division within the country, have become even much more exacerbated by the current regime. So much that Nigeria faces the prospect of state failure. As I speak to you, terrorists, bandits, and other criminal elements have taken over almost every facet of Nigeria, to the extent that even the Federal Capital Territory, the seat of government, is presently under siege. This is a product of the complete uselessness and incapability of the capitalist ruling elite to resolve any of the problems facing society. And that is why it is urgent today that the Nigerian working class rise up to the occasion to effect a socialist revolution, to end capitalism and provide a way out for society. Nigeria's problems are not insoluble. The only thing is that capitalism cannot provide any solution to these problems. Capitalism can only add to the problem. We need to nationalize the commanding height of Nigeria's economy, place them under workers' control and democratic management in order to ensure that the wealth of Nigeria that is currently cornered by 1% of the population is made available to provide for education and other basic services. If this is done, Nigeria can once again become a prosperous country where its people, live a prosperous and harmonious life. But this will not happen without building a mass workers' party armed with socialist programs. And that is why the DSM in Nigeria is campaigning for the building of such a party. As the country goes towards a general election next year, there is very little to expect, in terms of whether the country will change or not. And that is because for the candidates and political parties on offer, they all represent the same pro-capitalist policies. Unfortunately, the Socialist Party of Nigeria, SPN, which the members of the CWI formed and built and used to intervene in the 2019 general elections, has now been deregistered by the ruling elite, so that today the working people have no genuine party campaigning for socialism in the coming election. Although there is a Labour Party which has a presidential candidate that is currently enjoying some minimal support in society, unfortunately, both the Labour Party and the presidential candidate stand for just different variants of the ideas of capitalism that is the root of Nigeria's problem. And that is why, side by side, we're campaigning for a mass workers' party. The forces of CWI in Nigeria are equally campaigning for the Labour Party to be developed and rebuilt into a party that can actually fight for the interests of the working people. It is only if this is done that it can be possible to begin to have any hope that Nigeria's fortunes will change. I have to end with the immortal word of Rosa Luxemburg, which is to say that for Nigeria, the choice is solely between socialism and barbarism.
Thanks to Rachel for setting up the short video clip. Next speaker will be Weitzman from the Marxist and Workers' Party of South Africa. Please do a warm welcome to Weitzman. And the last speaker will be Tony from the International Secretariat of the CWI, closing the session.
Amanda! Amanda! Viva CWI, viva! Thank you very much, Comrade Chairperson. All around the world, as I think the previous speakers have so eloquently reported, it is clear that we are moving into a period in which the thunderclouds that are gathering above will have the effect of creating the turmoil that the comrades have described. And we are entering this period at a time when the strategists of capital themselves are flying through these thunderclouds blind as pilots. A couple of months ago, maybe 12 or 18 months, I'm not sure, the governor of the Bank of England was asked to explain how they determine the quantities in quantitative easing. And his reply was, it works better in practice than it does in theory. In this period, now that at least I think 3/4 of the world's central banks are recoiling from quantitative easing and adopting the new policy of quantitative tightening, they are as blind about the consequences that this will have as they were at the time that they introduced quantitative easing. But the consequences of the implementation of quantitative tightening, which is a significant increase and an accelerated increase in interest rates, is going to have devastating consequences, not just in the US, where the Federal Reserve is leading the pace, setting the pace for other central banks across the world, but particularly in the neo-colonial world as well. There are 109 countries that are either experiencing high food prices, energy crisis, and high levels of indebtedness. Of the 114, I think, 69 of those countries are suffering from all three at the same time. The consequence of the raising of interest rates by the US and all the other capitalist powers will mean that we are going to have a repeat of what happened in Sri Lanka several times over, magnified many times as well. Already we have seen an example of what this has meant. It is in 2011 that the consequences of the policies of the global capitalist class precipitated the Egyptian and the Tunisian revolution. This crisis, has seen, as the comrades have described, mass movements across the different continents and the heroic movement of the Sri Lankan masses. That is why a meeting of this character is of such critical importance. When Trotsky was jailed in 1905, accused by the prosecution of having instigated the 1905 revolution, his reply was, revolutionaries don't instigate revolution, they prepare for them. And that is why these meetings, and particularly the commissions that have taken place, a couple of which I've been able to participate in, are so critical in preparing us for the events that are lying ahead. The policies that are being pursued by the Federal Reserve are not just being imitated in the case of South Africa, by the way. There we have a central bank governor who 2 years ago won the award of Central Bank Governor of the Year globally. He has already run ahead of the process, even before the Federal Reserve raised interest rates. We already had an increase in a country of about 60 million, where 19 million people are credit impaired. That means that they are in arrears by 3 months or so in the repayment of housing loans, mortgages, car loans, personal loans, furniture loans, all of which are going to escalate in the next period. And unfortunately, the picture that the comrades have painted about the leadership of the workers' movement here, particularly the Labour Party, has its counterpart in the leadership of the trade union movement and political formations inside South Africa itself. In a country, by the way, where, in contrast to what has happened to most of the rest of the world, where the impact of the restoration of capitalism in the former Soviet Union, the leadership of the trade unions in particular, have found it continuously necessary to dress up their positions even as they were betraying the working class in the rhetoric of socialism. The most recent example of which is the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party, created by the leader of the Metal Workers Union, the biggest trade union in South Africa and I think on the African continent, with a membership now of 290,000. But important not only for its size, but also as a result of its traditions. It was the Metal Workers Union, a year before the first post-apartheid democratic elections, tabled a resolution at the Congress of South African Trade Unions, proposing that a workers' party should be established to contest the ANC the following year, in 1994. Now they were a minority and they were defeated. But the idea of a workers' party has never completely been buried. It has remained, particularly within the Metal Workers Union, alongside the ideas of socialism. It is not an accident that following the Marikana massacre, the 10th anniversary we are celebrating this year, that it was the Metal Workers Union, the ordinary members, that put pressure on their leaders to convene a special national congress for the purpose of establishing a workers' party. Regrettably, the leadership had ideologically and politically degenerated to the point where they went through the motions of convening that special national congress without the slightest intention of allowing it to emerge with a workers' party. Now, what I'm describing here is the fact that on the one hand, the idea of a workers' party and socialism has remained as part of the workers' movement, has remained as part of its tradition despite all the attempts to bury it, including by the leadership of the workers' movement itself. There is, in that sense, an objective basis for it. But it also required a section of this international to defend that idea, to fight for it, to ensure that it is never completely taken off the agenda of the workers' movement. And I'm proud to say that the comrades who are in the Marxist Workers' Party have been alone on the left in raising that idea. We've been deserted when we took the first attempt, made the first attempt through the creation, when we were still called the Democratic Socialist Movement, together with the National Independent Strike Committee of the Mine Workers, to create the Workers' and Socialist Party then. Every single left tendency and formation inside the country deserted us. But we had planted, and that is what we are proud of, the flag of revolutionary socialism on the political plane in electoral politics. Now, of course, as comrades know, the comrades who were part of us at the time that we launched WASP have gone their own separate way, and we let them have the name and started afresh calling ourselves the Marxist Workers' Party. And through the Marxist Workers' Party's work, the idea of the reconvening of a summit that was called in 2018, where 1,000 delegates came together and in the end adopted a declaration for the formation of a mass workers' party and a socialist program, in which the leaders, including especially the leaders of the Metal Workers Union, have tried everything in their power to prevent from being implemented. But we have not given up, we have not retreated. On the 24th of August, there will now be an attempt at a general strike. Let's not exaggerate what might be possible. But it is entirely possible that that general strike, called by the new trade union federation, SAFTU, will get significant support, certainly far greater than their previous efforts have been, because of the mood inside the country. And what is different about the demands around which that general strike is called is that for the first time, the leadership of the new trade union federation, which came out of the split following the Marikana massacre and the expulsion of NUMSA from the old federation, for the first time they've put amongst their demand the removal of the entire ANC government, not just individual ministers. But we are perfectly aware, comrades, that what the leadership appears to be doing is to put their demands into line with the general sentiment that exists within the working class. You can hardly turn on the radio these days on talk shows, and you will have 2 or 3 out of 5 people saying that the ANC government must go. It is likely that by 2024, the ANC will not be able to get enough votes to be able to form a government on its own. We will be into a period of a pro-capitalist coalition in which even the pretend radicals of the economic freedom fighters will put up their hands to be part of an exchange for a cabinet seats for their leaders. And they will, in other words, be participating in the prolongation of the sustained attack that has been launched on the working class, intensified particularly after the 2008 financial implosion, which saw South Africa losing 1 million jobs at that time. That attack and that crisis that has followed so far as the working class is concerned has intensified in the next period. In other words, we have never had more favorable conditions for the idea of the creation of a workers' party. The problem does not lie with the working class. It lies with its own leadership. We are in a position to try and influence it, and it is that process with our small numbers. And that is what we will be stepping up in the next period. Unlike many of the left who are bemoaning the battle that has broken out in the Metal Workers Union, saying how terrible it is that the union is divided, we recognize in it a rebellion by the rank and file, by a leadership that has betrayed it, not only on the workplace, by the way, but particularly on the political plane, had rejected the phony Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party that they created and stood in the elections in 2019, where a union with that number of members, in a country where you can get a seat on just 35,000 votes, could have made 10 seats. With their families, they could have quadrupled it. With the support of the rest of the federation, they could have emerged as the biggest opposition party based on socialism in parliament itself. They betrayed the working class, this leadership, and we welcome the rebellion of the opposition, who call themselves metal that will not bend, in an attempt to restore the traditions of socialism and the idea of a workers' party, and we are reaching out to them in that struggle. We hope that in the next period, in that battle, because they've attempted to bury the idea of a summit specifically to create a workers' party, to announce, because it is our position that the way to go about it is to set a date. And we are saying that date be next year, May Day. Because it then gives the working class the opportunity, in all the different struggles currently taking place in isolation from each other, from what we describe as the three main theatres of struggle. Working class communities involved in what are called service delivery protests, in which, incidentally, South Africa is at the top of the league per head of population in the number of protests, to come together with the increasing number of strikes in the workplace and the struggles of the students and the youth, to create, through the Workers' Party, an umbrella, a single point of reference for all these struggles to come together and to prepare for the elections in 2024. That is what, with our small numbers, we've been able to keep alive despite everything that has been thrown in our direction by the leadership. So, comrades, I want to conclude by saying, in the period that we are now entering into, Trotsky said that about the immortal Spanish working class, that they could have taken power several times over. That opportunity is going to come the way of the working class in the next period worldwide. And where we have our forces present, it becomes our bounden duty to marry the ideas of the Committee for a Workers' International, the clarity of its thinking, of its analysis, of its strategy and tactics, to ensure that the possibilities inherent in what is opening up can be realized, so that even if in one country, where we have particularly the stronger sections, that possibility arises, we will be able to see socialism, possibly in my lifetime. Amandla!
Thank you so much, man, for the inspiring speech. Last speaker for tonight's meeting is Jonas.
Well, thanks, comrades, and I think we've had an excellent rally to take place halfway through what has been an extremely successful school of the Committee for a Workers' International. And of course, this meeting has taken place after years of us being separated physically, of not being able to come together to collectively discuss the era that we're in, and most importantly, not just to analyse what is taking place, but to sharpen our blade and our weapon to actively intervene and participate in the struggles which are already taking place. As Peter indicated, we are already in a new era. It is not a question of us looking to the future for a new era to develop. The crisis we see unfolding globally places an entirely new historic responsibility on the working class in general and on the Committee for a Workers' International. We've heard today's tremendous reports of the struggles that are taking place throughout the world. One of the tasks of the Revolutionary Party is to act as the memory of the working class, to draw upon the experiences of the historical struggles of the working class to apply it to the current situation that we are now in. We can also add, comrades, in a certain sense, we are the memory of the bourgeoisie as well, of the ruling class. We don't forget what they have said. Let us cast our minds back only a few decades. Maybe the younger comrades here have not got enough grey hairs to remember this. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, 92, what were we told? They had won. Bush declared we had won. A new era of stability, a new era of democracy, a new era of economic prosperity laid before humankind. And yet what has that system brought? As the CWI anticipated at the time, it has brought war, it has brought destitution, it has brought a degree of human misery which has not been seen for generations in Asia, Africa and Latin America, and now we also have to add to Western imperialist powers and countries as well. Nowhere do we have a situation of stability. Nowhere do we have the prospect of prosperity in reality developing. We have a series of attacks. What is the ruling class preparing for at this stage? It is not only in Sri Lanka they are threatening more austerity and more attacks. This is the programme of the ruling class which is being prepared for at this stage. And it's not just an economic question. They are preparing ruthlessly for the class battles they know are coming. They are preparing with more repressive authoritarian measures. We've seen this militarization taking place in a whole series of countries, and brutal measures of an anti-democratic measure being prepared by the ruling class to face up to this position. We face a global catastrophe, comrades, for capitalism. And we as a party and as socialists, and acting on behalf of the working class, we will put this system in the dock. Let us explain exactly what he's responsible for at this stage. The United Nations is anticipating, as a direct result of the Ukraine war, there will be tens of millions in the course of the next 1 to 2 years that will be thrust into starvation. It is a horrific situation which is unfolding in the neo-colonial world at this stage. Food insecurity has gone up in the last 2 years alone from 135 million to 276 million. Those are the United Nations figures, which probably underestimate the position. And the striking thing is, this is not just Asia, Africa and Latin America. We're seeing starvation and hunger come in to Europe, to US imperialism, to the major imperialist powers in a degree that we've not seen since the 1920s and the 1930s. We're in a new multipolar world of conflict. The Ukraine war represents that, and it will not be the last war that will break out as a consequence of this global crisis of capitalism that we see. But as we have anticipated, as comrades have here today, what have we also seen? As we anticipated in the CWI at the beginning of this pandemic, the crisis which is coming is going to trickle multiple uprisings of the masses. And I think even the International Secretariat was somewhat surprised at the speed with which we've seen that unfold in the last couple of years. It is phenomenal what has taken place in terms of the mass movements. Chile, Colombia, Sudan, Ecuador, Lebanon, Iraq, more, and the list goes on. Now we'd have to add Panama, the bastion of stability that US imperialism rested upon in Central America, armed demonstrations against the government in relation to the cost of living crisis taking place. And what an answer to the sceptics, those who wrote off the working class. The working class is finished. The working class is not going to move into struggle. Well, these movements have been driven mainly by the youth in most countries, but what's emerged? The general strike has been back on the agenda in a whole series of countries. The general strike in Ecuador, the general strike in Colombia, the general strike in Argentina, the general strike now in Sri Lanka that we've seen posed, and now, at least verbally, put back on the agenda here in Britain itself. It is the class battle which has been put back onto the agenda as far as the global position is concerned at this particular time. And from that point of view, comrades, this is the era that we are now in. And it is a question of how we face up to intervening in those struggles and developing an alternative. We are confronting a systemic crisis. Whatever the capitalists do, they will zigzag with their policy, but they're not going to find a way out of this crisis in terms of being able to solve the problems. And what a grotesque system we have. And we have, I think, drive home the point that this is one of the driving motors of the behind the uprisings that we've taken place. It's the grotesque inequality which has exploded and been accelerated during the pandemic itself. And the profits, it has not been lost on millions of working people around the world. What has taken place during the course of this pandemic? Even in the last couple of weeks, what are the figures have been announced? In the oil sector, staggering figures announced. The oil sector, the main companies, they have made $3 billion every single day for the last 50 years. I mean, it's incredible in terms of what has been accumulated. The top 10 billionaires on the planet have increased their wealth during the pandemic at the rate of $15,000 every second for the 2 years. It's phenomenal. And this has not been lost in terms of the masses around the world, and has been a driving factor of many of the uprisings and movements that we have taken place. We are dealing here, comrades, in a certain sense, with a new type of capitalism. It is more parasitical than it's ever been in its history, in its exploitation, of its concentration of power and wealth into the hands of a few. And when we talk about the capitalist class, you can't fully quantify it, but let's not exaggerate what they are. They have social reserves and a base to rest on, but you're only talking of 2,700, 3,000 billionaires existing on the planet. That's really the ruling class. They have their social reserves, but they don't have the forces of Sri Lanka and elsewhere have indicated. Once the masses are determined and stand up and challenge and move into action, even the most apparently powerful of tyrants can be challenged and indeed defeated. We are dealing, comrades, with a protracted death agony of this system, and it's posing the need for socialism in a more urgent way than what it has in any other historical era. The crisis we face on the environment is accelerating at a rate of knots, and that, by the way, comrades, comes directly back to the issue of capitalism. Capitalism cannot resolve that particular problem. And look how it's linked to the issue of privatisation and neoliberalism. Staggering figures produced from Chile in terms of the drought which has racked the country over the course of the past period. The privatisation of the water industry is carried out there. The private companies in Chile, they actually put aside and register 2% of the water is for human consumption. 38% of it is directed towards the big forestries who are then used to exploit the trees and expel them and, of course, boost the big profits of the major companies as well. And the consequence you have for the first time in history is water rationing in Santiago. It's incredible what is unfolding, and that can be replicated on a higher scale in India, Pakistan and other countries as a consequence of the continuation of capitalism and landlordism in those countries. And we need, above all, in going into this crisis, a global response. It is a global alternative which is posed as being necessary in order to replace capitalism with socialism itself in the coming period. We face a dystopian world now. It's going to go, further crises are going to develop in the course of the next period. It illustrates above all the need for a proper democratic plan of the world's resources, to apply the resources. And what a farce it is when we have the propaganda by the representatives of capitalism, by their apologists in the labour movement against nationalisation and against planning. As if they don't plan, the multinationals, in terms of how they organise their production. Of course they do. The difference is they plan for their own profit rather than for the planning to be run democratically for the interests of the working people of this planet. We have an incredible paradox, comrades. At the depth of this crisis in global capitalism on the one side, we have on the other side an incredible flourishing of human ingenuity and development in the scientific field of what is possible, but is unable to be applied on a generalised basis for the benefit of humankind under capitalism itself. And the mass of the global population is left in destitution and horrific conditions. And therefore, comrades, we have, I think, to draw the conclusions from this. We should have nothing but confidence. There will be further struggles. Sri Lanka is not the last of this uprising. Further uprisings in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe and the United States are going to flow from this position. The key question is what lessons are learned to take these uprisings forward to a successful conclusion. And what a shambolic betrayal we have. It is shameful that in the depth of this crisis, the official left has abandoned the idea of socialism, has incorporated itself into trying to manage capitalism, and therefore has left himself in the position of acting for the representatives of capitalism and carrying out the dirty work for the capitalist class itself. As Palmela indicated, that is what we see, unfortunately, in Latin America. The coming to power of new left governments, so-called, in inverted commas. Colombia, Chile, Peru as well, every single one of them, by the way, a product of the mass movement of millions that took place prior to the elections. The left comes in and they abandon any pretense of trying to change the system and have accommodated themselves to capitalism. Mélenchon in France, it represented a potentially great step forward, a potential for the advance of the movement. The battle is not over, but it is highly significant that in this election campaign, Mélenchon dropped the idea of speaking of socialism, which he used to in 2017. It is a paradox as the crisis has got deeper. The so-called left have gone further to the right and become less and less radical as it goes. Now that is in marked contrast to what is happening below, to the mass of the rank and file. In these movements that we see, the cry for revolution, for change, for an end to the system has become widespread and enormously popular, and it illustrates the potential which exists. And therefore, comrades, as part of this struggle is the issue of the task of rebuilding the workers' movement, of rebuilding support for the idea of socialism as an alternative to this system, and not adopting any hint of a policy that is possible to manage or remain with the interests within the capitalist system itself. We support, as the Committee for Workers International, every single struggle of the working people. We support every advance they make, every conquest of a wage increase, opposition to cuts, etc. But we also have to argue in the course of this period that any concessions the ruling class could be forced to make, that they're forced to give to the left hand, they will prepare to take it back from the right. And therefore the struggle is inseparably bound up with the need to change the system, to break from capitalism itself, and to build a real workers' alternative. There is a crying need, a vacuum globally, for a new mass workers' parties. That is the task that is on the order of the day. Even the absence of that is not going to prevent new struggles taking place, during which workers and the youth can draw their own conclusions. But we, comrades, have a crucial task here, to intervene in these events, analyse them, yes, prepare for the future events that come, but also to ensure that we're advancing the programme, the slogan, the tactics that are necessary to assist the movement going forward and draw all the necessary conclusions as to how it can be, how a socialist transformation of society can be carried through. We should remember, comrades, the words of Eugene Debs, the old American workers' leader. The most heroic word in every language is revolution. And we stand in support of that concept. Now, as a CWI, we have a responsibility to change that heroic word into a living reality by building the forces that are necessary of revolutionary parties and organisations to intervene in the struggles of the working class, to begin the task of assembling a mass socialist alternative, which is the way to challenge capitalism. We, comrades, as Marxists, we're not afraid to be in a minority at different stages of the struggle. We argue our case and we offer an alternative. And when we're in a minority, we should also be confident that minorities could become majorities, and sometime in a relatively short space of time. And that, comrades, really is the task that we have to fight for such an alternative with the urgency that this situation demands of it. The future of the planet now depends on the issue of the ability of the working class to seize the weapon of socialism and to break with capitalism. In that process, which will be drawn out over a period of years, our forces of the CWI, small as they are today, can play a crucial role, and in a relatively short space of time, in many will be able to transform ourselves into larger parties. So, comrades, I think we've had an excellent rally tonight, halfway through this school, which will play an indispensable role in the struggle to build a viable socialist alternative, which will play a crucial role in the struggle for the socialist revolution globally, which is the ultimate solution and answer to this grotesque crisis of capitalism which we are now having to live through.
Thanks a lot, Tony, for summing up tonight's discussion. So, dear comrades and not yet comrades, we've heard argument about how important it is to join the CWI to bring about the socialist change.